Before we begin this episode, I want you to pause for a moment and think about something very simple but uncomfortable. How many conflicts in your life started not because something actually happened, but because of what you thought happened? How many times have you interpreted silence as rejection, criticism as disrespect, or delay as betrayal? Most of us like to believe that our problems are caused by circumstances, by other people, or by unfair systems around us. Yet if we slow down and observe carefully, we begin to notice that many of the most painful situations in our lives were not created by reality itself. They were created by the interpretation our mind attached to that reality. Today's episode is not just a story. It is a mirror. It begins with a fisherman pulling a mysterious chest from a river in Baghdad. Inside that chest lies the body of a woman, and what follows is a chain of events involving a powerful ruler, a desperate investigation, a grieving husband, a careless lie, and a single assumption that destroyed multiple lives. But if you listen closely, this is not an ancient story. It is a story about modern students dealing with pressure, professionals navigating workplace politics, families struggling with communication, and young people trying to understand relationships in a world full of noise. Behind this story stands a powerful framework from a book called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, which argues that most of the suffering we experience in life comes from invisible agreements we have accepted without questioning them. In this episode, you and I are not just listening to a tale from history. We are examining the silent psychological contracts that quietly shape our decisions, our reactions, and ultimately the direction of our lives. I am Zulfah, and this is the Zayd Podcast. Let's begin. There is an old story that begins on the banks of the River Tigris in Baghdad. First glance, it appears to be a simple tale from a distant time, yet the deeper you look into it, the more it begins to resemble the psychological reality of modern life. The characters may belong to another century, but their emotions, mistakes, and assumptions feel strikingly familiar. Imagine a fisherman standing beside the river after a long and exhausting day. Since sunrise, he has been throwing his net into the water again and again, hoping that the river might reward his patience. Yet the hours have passed quietly, and the net has returned almost empty each time. Anyone who has struggled for something important will recognize this feeling. It is the quiet exhaustion that appears when effort does not immediately produce results. Students experience it when they study for weeks yet still doubt their performance. Professionals experience it when they work late nights but feel unnoticed. Entrepreneurs experience it when months of effort seem invisible to the world. The fisherman feels something similar. His body is tired, his expectations are fading, and yet he decides to try one final time before leaving the river. He casts his net into the water once more. Suddenly something heavy pulls back. First he feels excitement because weight in the net usually means success. Perhaps this is the largest fish he has ever caught. Perhaps this single catch will justify the entire day of effort. But when the net finally emerges from the water, what appears is not a fish. It is a large iron chest. Old, sealed, mysterious, and heavy. The fisherman immediately thinks what most people would think in that moment. Treasure. Because when someone who has little encounters something unusual, hope immediately begins filling in the missing details. The mind does not see uncertainty, it sees possibility. Unable to open the chest himself, the fisherman carries it to the palace of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, a ruler known for justice and generosity. The guards allow him to present the chest before the king, and the royal court gathers to witness what everyone assumes will be a discovery of gold or jewels. But when the chest is opened, the room falls into a deep and unsettling silence. Inside the chest lies the body of a young woman. The silence that fills the palace is not just shock. It is the kind of silence that appears when reality violently contradicts expectation. Moments earlier, everyone imagined wealth and reward. Now they are confronting tragedy and crime. For the Caliph, this moment creates a different kind of pressure. A woman has been murdered somewhere in his kingdom, and the crime has remained hidden long enough to reach the palace itself. Instead of approaching the situation calmly, the ruler reacts emotionally. Feeling that his authority has been challenged, he orders his trusted vizier Jafar ibn Yahya to find the murderer within 3 days. If he fails, he will be executed. Now pause here and notice the first psychological pattern emerging from the story. Caliph took the situation personally. Rather than treating the crime as an investigation, he experienced it as a reflection on his leadership and reputation. His ego entered the situation before his reason did. This is precisely what the second agreement in the 4 agreements warns us about, the habit of taking things personally. Modern life is filled with examples of this behavior. A manager offers constructive feedback, and an employee interprets it as a personal attack. A friend forgets to reply to a message, and the mind begins imagining disrespect or rejection. Teacher criticizes an assignment, and the student assumes they are being unfairly targeted. In reality, most people are simply reacting to their own circumstances, their own stress, and their own limitations. Yet when we take every action personally, the world begins to feel like a battlefield where everyone is secretly working against us. Meanwhile, Jafar begins the investigation. He questions fishermen, merchants, travelers, and villagers across the kingdom. Yet the mystery refuses to move forward. No one recognizes the woman. No witnesses appear. No clues surface. The first day passes. Then the second. By the time the third day arrives, Jafar quietly prepares himself for death because the truth remains hidden. Then something unexpected happens. 2 men rush into the palace. One is a young merchant. The other is an old man. Both claim responsibility for the murder. Each insists that he should be punished instead of the other. Eventually, the young merchant begins telling the story. The woman in the chest, he explains, was his wife. And suddenly the narrative transforms from a mystery into a tragedy of human emotion. The merchant describes how deeply he loved her. Their life together had been simple but meaningful. They had built a home, started a family, and raised a child. Like many couples navigating life together, they faced difficulties but remained committed to each other. Then one day his wife became seriously ill. Medicine did not help. Remedies did not help. Her condition continued to worsen. During this difficult period, she heard about a strange tree growing near Basra whose apples were said to possess healing properties. She asked her husband if he could bring one of those apples for her. Now consider the emotional dimension of this request. For someone who loves deeply, such a request is not merely practical. It becomes symbolic. It becomes a test of devotion, sacrifice, and commitment. The merchant travels across deserts, spends money he can barely afford, and searches relentlessly until he finally finds the tree. Only 3 apples remain on its branches. He buys them all and returns home feeling proud and relieved. His wife eats 1 apple and begins to feel slightly better. The remaining apples are placed safely inside the house. But the following day something unexpected happens. While returning home from work, the merchant sees a slave walking through the street holding a golden apple. The same apple he brought from Basra. In that moment a thought enters his mind, and that thought quietly becomes the most dangerous moment of the entire story. Instead of asking questions, he begins forming conclusions. He assumes his wife must have given the apple to someone else. He assumes betrayal. He assumes deception. This moment represents the 3rd agreement from the book. Do not make assumptions. The human mind dislikes uncertainty. When information is incomplete, imagination rushes in to fill the gaps. Unfortunately, imagination rarely fills those gaps with calm explanations. Fills them with dramatic possibilities. The merchant rushes home and sees that 2 apples remain instead of 3. For him, this confirms the story he has already created in his mind. He confronts his wife angrily. She denies everything, but by this point denial does not matter. When assumptions harden into belief, evidence loses its influence. In a moment of uncontrolled anger, he kills the woman he loves. Later that evening, their child reveals the truth. The child had secretly taken one apple to show friends outside, and a thief had stolen it. The merchant collapses under the weight of realization. His wife had been innocent. His anger had been built entirely on assumption. This is the central psychological warning of the Four Agreements. Assumptions are not harmless mental habits. They are powerful narratives that shape behavior. Once we believe them, we begin acting as if they are reality. Look around modern society and you will see this pattern everywhere. Students assume they are not intelligent enough and stop trying before they discover their potential. Professionals assume their colleagues dislike them and withdraw from collaboration. Couples assume betrayal instead of communicating honestly. Assumptions silently sabotage relationships, careers, and opportunities. The merchant eventually confesses the crime to the Caliph because he cannot allow another innocent person to die in his place. The ruler now faces a complicated decision. The man committed murder, yet he also demonstrated courage by accepting responsibility. Meanwhile, the slave who triggered the misunderstanding remains free. Caliph gives Jafar another chance. He must find the slave within 3 days. The search begins again. Markets, merchant houses, and neighborhoods are questioned across the city. Yet the search seems hopeless. Then Jafar notices something unexpected when he returns home. His daughter is playing with a golden apple. When questioned, she reveals that the apple was given to her by one of their own slaves named Rayhan. Truth finally emerges. Rayhan admits that he stole the apple from a child simply to impress the girl he liked. When the merchant confronted him in the street, he casually lied and claimed the apple came from his beloved. To him, it was a meaningless lie. To the merchant, it became the trigger for tragedy. This moment illustrates the first agreement from Don Miguel Ruiz's philosophy: be impeccable with your word. Words are powerful because they shape how other people interpret reality. A careless statement can create misunderstanding, insecurity, or fear inside another person's mind. In the modern digital world, this principle is even more important. Messages travel instantly across social media, emails, and conversations. A sentence written casually can damage relationships or reputations in ways that cannot easily be repaired. The Caliph eventually punishes the slave and forgives Jafar, yet nothing can bring the woman back. Tragedy remains a permanent reminder of how small psychological habits can produce enormous consequences. And this is where the deeper message of the Four Agreements becomes relevant for our lives today. Most of us are living under invisible agreements we never consciously chose. As children, we absorb beliefs from parents, teachers, culture, religion, and society. Over time, these beliefs form a system of internal rules that determine how we see ourselves and others. The book suggests replacing those unconscious agreements with 4 intentional ones. Speak truthfully, avoid taking things personally, refuse to make assumptions, and always do your best. These agreements are simple in theory but transformative in practice. They encourage us to communicate clearly instead of guessing. They encourage emotional independence instead of constant validation. They encourage effort instead of perfectionism. For students navigating academic pressure, these agreements offer clarity. For professionals dealing with workplace stress, they provide perspective. For young people trying to build meaningful relationships, they create a foundation of honesty and patience. If we begin practicing these agreements consistently, something subtle begins to change. We become less reactive and more thoughtful. We become less controlled by imagination and more guided by reality. In a world full of misunderstandings, that shift alone can transform the direction of an entire life. Today's conversation felt uncomfortably familiar. That is because the patterns we discussed are not rare. They are deeply embedded in the way most people think and react. The real question is not whether assumptions exist in your life. The real question is whether you will continue letting them control your decisions or begin questioning the agreements that created them. If even one idea from this episode encourages you to communicate more clearly, think more patiently, or challenge the stories your mind automatically creates, then this conversation has already served its purpose. This is Zulfah, and you have been listening to the Zayd podcast on Zayd.com, and until the next episode, pay close attention to the agreements shaping your thoughts, because the life you experience tomorrow will often be the result of the agreements you accept today.